All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving deep into a figure you probably think you know, Steve Jobs. We've all heard the stories, the legend, but are we really seeing the full picture?
I think that's a great question. There's the carefully crafted image, the Steve Jobs we think we know, but then there's the man behind the myth.
Exactly. And that's what we're here to explore today. We're going beyond the surface using his Wikipedia entry and excerpts from his authorized biography. It's actually kind of wild, you know. He was so meticulous about controlling his public image, yet he totally disapproved of the biography after it was released.
Yeah, that's definitely a head scratcher, isn't it? He gave Walter Isaacson, the biographer, tons of access, but absolutely no say in the final product.
It's like he wanted the truth out there, but only on his own terms. So for this deep dive, we're going to piece together those less-known details, the contradictions, the things that make him such a fascinating, complex figure. And what better place to start than the beginning, right? His birth and adoption.
Absolutely. His biological mother, Joanne Schiebel, she was kind of pressured to give him up. She chose an adoptive couple, Paul and Clara Jobs, who made a pretty big promise, you know?
To put him through college.
Yep, exactly. And they kept that promise.
It makes you wonder how that shaped his life, that knowledge from the very start. Growing up in Mountain View, his adoptive dad, Paul, taught him about electronics in their garage.
Almost like a little foreshadowing of Apple, right?
But then his school years, well, those were a bit more rebellious, to say the least.
Oh, yeah, he was quite the prankster, always clashing with authority. There's this great story, actually, about him needing parts for a project when he was just 13.
Let me guess, he went down to the local Radio Shack.
Nope, he called Bill Hewlett himself.
No way. The co-founder of HP.
The one and only. Even as a kid, Jobs was bold. You got to give him that.
That definitely tracks with his personality later on. But it's his teenage years that really set the stage, don't you think? Yeah. The LSD, the Eastern mysticism, that journey to India seeking enlightenment.
It's such a stark contrast to the buttoned-up Apple CEO we see later. I mean, this is the guy who drops out of Reed College after one semester but keeps auditing classes, including, get this, calligraphy.
Calligraphy, what's that got to do with anything?
Well, he actually connected that class to the Mac's design in his famous Stanford speech. He was drawn to how calligraphy balanced art and technology that became a cornerstone of his design philosophy.
So even in those early days, he was connecting the dots in his own way. Speaking of connections, let's move on to Apple. Jobs is back from India working at Atari, and then there's that blue box phase with Wozniak. What was that all about?
The blue box was a device they made that let people make free long-distance calls. A little mischievous, but it showed off their technical skills and the, entrepreneurial spirit. They weren't just building stuff, they were figuring out how to make money from it.
And then, of course, there's the iconic garage. Humble beginnings, financial struggles. I mean, Wozniak even sold his prized calculator to fund production.
Now that's dedication. And the name Apple. It came from an orchard at a commune Jobs visited. It's wild how such a simple origin story turned into such a sophisticated brand.
That's the thing with Jobs, isn't it?
Yeah.
So much contrast. I mean, the Apple it was a game changer with that built-in video display. It made personal computers accessible to regular people, not just tech nerds.
You're right. It wasn't just about the tech. It was about making it user-friendly, aesthetically pleasing. And that's where Jobs' design intuition really comes in. While Wozniak was the engineering genius, Jobs was obsessed with the look and feel of the Apple II, the case, the power supply. He knew that tech needed to be beautiful to capture people's imaginations.
He understood the whole package, not just the nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, because running alongside this meteoric rise of Apple, there's this more complicated personal story going on. Jobs' relationship with Chrisanne Brennan, the birth of his daughter Lisa, his initial paternity denial, it kind of clashes with the public image of the visionary leader.
Definitely adds a layer of complexity. You have the DNA test, child support battles, even a Time Person of the Year article where Brennan shares her side of the story. It's a good reminder that behind the legend, there were real human struggles, messy relationships, consequences.
It really makes you think about how much we separate the art from the artist, especially with someone as influential as Jobs. But I guess that's a bigger conversation for another time. For now, let's keep moving, shall we? On to the Macintosh era, a whole new chapter of innovation and disruption. So last time we left off with Jobs at this crossroads. He's got Pixar doing incredibly well, but also faced these major setbacks personally, professionally. I mean, it really seemed like a turning point.
It was, and then things take a really dramatic turn. 1997, Apple, the company he co-founded, is basically on the verge of bankruptcy.
Oh, wow. So talk about coming full circle.
Yeah.
How does Jobs, the guy they basically ousted, end up back in charge of the company that rejected him?
Well, Apple actually acquired next to Jobs' computer company.
Yeah.
For a cool $400 million.
So he sold his comeback company to the one that pushed him out. That's pretty audacious, wouldn't you say?
It was a power move for sure. And he pretty much became Apple's leader right away. The CEO at the time, Gil Amelio, was out. And Jobs stepped in, first as interim CEO and then permanently by the year 2000.
Okay, so this feels like the Steve Jobs we know from the headlines. He's back. He's on a mission to save Apple. But what's his plan? How do you actually pull it off?
Focus. He had this laser focus. He cut projects that weren't working, streamlined their product line, ushered in a whole new era of design and innovation.
This is when we get the iMac right. That colorful all-in-one computer. Like nothing else out there at the time.
Exactly. It was so different from those boring beige boxes that everyone else was making. Jobs understood that design wasn't just about how something looked. It was about the whole experience, how it made you feel.
And he wasn't afraid to make some big changes with the iMac either, like getting rid of the floppy disk drive and going all in on USB.
Yeah, that was huge. Risky at the time, but it paid off big time. USB became the standard, partly because of Apple pushing for it. And then there's iTunes. It completely changed how we listen to music.
And the iPod, of course. The iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket. It felt like Jobs could do no wrong.
Apple was on a roll. But it wasn't just about the products. It was Jobs' vision, his charisma, this almost supernatural ability to get people excited about Apple.
Right. He was a master showman.
Right.
Those keynote speeches, the Steve Notes legendary people even talked about his reality distortion field. Like he could convince you anything was possible.
He was incredibly persuasive, for sure. But he was also really demanding, a perfectionist, sometimes even ruthless.
It wasn't all smooth sailing, though, right? I mean, he had some pretty public feuds, like with Michael Dell.
Oh, yeah. That was classic Silicon Valley drama. Jobs was really critical of Dell, called their computers boring.
When Dell suggested that he'd shut down Apple if he was in charge, well, Jobs never let him forget that.
And when Apple's market cap eventually passed, Dell's Jobs sent out that famous email to everyone at Apple basically saying, "I told you so." Right. But it's important to remember Jobs wasn't just motivated by money or proving people wrong. He really wanted to make great products, to push the limits, to make a dent in the universe, as he put it.
It seems like that drive, that ambition was always there. And while all of this is happening professionally, his personal life's evolving too. He marries Laureen Powell in 1991, has 3 more children, and continues to rebuild his relationship with Lisa.
Yeah, it does seem like as he got older, his priorities shifted. Family and personal connections became more important. But then in 2003, everything changed. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
And that's when the story takes a bit of a darker turn. We know he resisted conventional medical treatments at first, went for alternative therapies.
And that's been debated a lot. Some people say it cost him valuable time.
It's such a difficult topic. It's impossible to know for sure what would happen if he'd done things differently.
You're right. We can't speculate. What we do know is that Jobs eventually had surgery, but his health was always a concern after that.
We see those pictures of him looking thinner and thinner at presentations. And then there was that obituary that got published by mistake, leading to his famous quote, "The reports of my death are greatly exaggerated." It was obvious he was in a fight.
And still through it all, he led Apple through one of its most successful periods, the iPhone, the iPad, all these incredible innovations.
It's almost superhuman, battling cancer, running a global company, and still innovating.
But it couldn't go on forever. In 2009, he took a leave of absence to have a liver transplant. He even offered Tim Cook part of his own liver.
Wow, that really shows the kind of bond they had. Cook's loyalty to Jobs, and Jobs' respect for his team.
It's a powerful moment, but even after the transplant, it was clear his health was declining. He took another leave of absence in 2011, and then in August that year, he resigned as Apple's CEO.
That must have been so tough for Apple fans everywhere.
Jobs wasn't just a CEO, he was Apple.
He was a visionary. He changed the tech industry forever. His resignation letter was really moving. He wrote, "I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come."
And just 6 weeks later, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. It really was the end of an era.
It was. His legacy is everywhere, though.
Yeah.
The products he created, the company he built, the people he inspired. But speaking of legacy, we have to talk about the authorized biography and all the controversy that came with it. We're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into the life of Steve Jobs. We've covered his triumphs, his flaws, and all those complexities that make him so fascinating. But now we got to talk about his legacy, especially with all the controversy surrounding his authorized biography.
It's interesting, isn't it? Even after his death, Steve Jobs couldn't escape the spotlight. That biography by Walter Isaacson, it came out right after he passed away, became a huge bestseller.
Yeah, but it also caused a lot of mixed feelings.
That's putting it mildly. I mean, think about it. Jobs gave Isaacson this incredible level of access. Over 40 interviews, conversations with everyone, family, friends, even competitors.
He really opened up, didn't he? But here's the thing. He had zero control over what went into the book.
Right. And knowing Jobs, his obsession with details, that had to be a tough pill to swallow.
It really does say a lot about him, that need for control, but also this willingness to let his story be told, even the not-so-pretty parts.
And the reactions were all over the place. Critics loved it. The public ate it up. But Jobs' family, his close friends like Tim Cook and Joni Ive, they were really critical.
I remember Cook calling it a tremendous disservice, saying that the Jobs portrayed in the book wasn't someone he'd want to work with. And Ive, his words were even harsher.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, what did they see that maybe the rest of us didn't?
Right. Were they protecting his image? Or was there something more?
Maybe it was just too real, The book doesn't shy away from Jobs' flaws, the ruthlessness, the manipulation, the way he could be so tough on people.
It's like they wanted a more polished version of the myth. But the biography, while it definitely acknowledges his achievements, it also shows us the human side of Jobs. And humans, well, we're messy.
Exactly. And even the book covers capture that. You've got the front cover, that stark black and white portrait by Albert Watson.
Super intense, right?
Oh, yeah. Watson even told Jobs to think about times he'd been challenged while they were shooting. You can see that defiance in his eyes.
And then you flip the book over, and it's this completely different vibe. There's Jobs sitting in the lotus position, holding the original Macintosh. It's almost peaceful, spiritual.
It's like the book itself is showing us these two sides of him, the intensity, the drive, but also the search for something deeper.
Which is, when you think about it, how we should approach these complex figures. It's not about black and white hero or villain. It's about seeing the whole picture.
Exactly. And speaking of seeing the whole picture, the biography also revealed some interesting things about Jobs' family. We know he and Lisa reconciled, but then there's this whole search for his biological family, the connection with his sister, Mona Simpson.
It adds another layer, doesn't it?
It really does. He reconnected with his birth mother, Joanne, but he never actually met his biological father, Abdul Fattah Jandali. And get this, Jobs used to go to a restaurant owned by Jandali. They were in the same place, but neither of them knew.
Wow. Talk about a misconnection. Makes you think about fate, family, all those things. And then there's the whole question of his legacy. Not just Apple, not just Pixar, but something bigger.
Right, his impact on the world.
Jobs had all this wealth, but he was super private about his philanthropy, which, of course, some people criticize.
I remember those banners they flew over his Stanford commencement speech, urging him to give more, and he never signed that giving pledge, where billionaires promised to donate most of their money.
It seemed to bother a lot of people. But some argue that his real contribution was his work itself, the products he created, the way they changed our lives.
In an interview, he once said that all the attention on his money was humorous, because it wasn't the most valuable thing that had happened to him. He cared more about the impact, about making a difference.
Yeah, that sounds like him. Downplaying the wealth, emphasizing the creative side, almost like he saw technology as his philanthropy, as a way to empower people.
Maybe that's the best way to think about his legacy. Not in dollars and cents, but in the lasting impact of his vision. The iPhones we use, the Pixar movies we watch, those are all part of the Steve Jobs story.
So after all this, where do we land? What's the takeaway?
Well, we've got this incredibly talented, ambitious guy, but he's also flawed, human. He transformed industries, but he also left a trail of complicated feelings. It's not a simple story.
And that's the challenge for us, right? To look beyond the myth, to see the whole person, to appreciate the good, but also acknowledge the not so good.
Because in the end, the Steve Jobs story isn't just about tech or business. It's about ambition. It's about creativity. It's about that human need to make a mark on the world.
And what kind of mark we choose to leave, well, that's something we all have to think about.
Absolutely.
Well, there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into the life of Steve Jobs has come to an end. Hope you enjoyed it, found it interesting, maybe even a little thought-provoking. But that's what we're all about here. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and who knows, maybe you'll be inspired to make your own dent in the universe. Until next time, keep diving deep.